This is John Brodak's museum, and I'm here with one of the guys who helped set up the display, and he's going to give us a guided tour, and I hope you enjoy it. So let's begin. Bob?
Hi there, my name is Bob Zambelli. I've been one of John's closest friends since the first fly in 1997. And about maybe 12 years ago, we talked about opening up a museum dedicated for the most part to control line, but we did acquire a bunch of kind of antique or classic RC equipment, so we're showing that too. John had very specific guidelines. One of the things he wanted to do is he wanted to have, for every kit manufacturer in the past, he wanted to have every single kit they made. And if you're into control line, you know there's things like Sterling, Vico, and quite a few others. And what I'd like to do is show you our call it our wall of fame, with a lot of the kits that John did acquire over probably a period of a good 8 to 10 years. So if you'd like to follow me, I'll point out some of the kits we have. Let's start at our wall of fame here. These are kits that were very, very rare. Sometimes they only built one model and then they went out of business. The Fire Brat, for example, was very successful. Jim Walker was the man who invented control line. So he had a couple of kits on the market, like for example, the Fire Brat, the Fireball, Fire Cub, which was an RC model, Fire Brat, Fire Baby, which was the first ready-to-fly airplane you could buy. It had an OK Cub 049 and a little balloon for a tank. And probably thousands of people learned how to fly on that. It was made out of balsa wood. It was held together by rubber bands. So if you did crash it, if you broke the wing, you glued it back together with Elmer's glue and continued learning, or continued crashing. We have just about every kit he made. And you see more here. These are kits that kind of a flash in the pan, if you will. They made a few of them. The company wasn't successful, couldn't sell, whatever, so they literally went out of business. And there was a company called Ambroid, which is shown for the most part by their orange box. Virtually every Ambroid kit was orange because the Ambroid glue was orange. And we have some, a lot of little scale models by Ambroid. And this is the Aries, which is probably one of the most famous classic control line kits. It was designed by Bill Werwidge, one of the most successful control line aircraft ever made. And John has actually duplicated the kit, and it is actually sold in his store, in his hobby shop. And these are all very strange, odd planes. We have no data on them. We don't know where they're from. We don't know when they were made. He bought out a huge collection, and a lot of these were in the collection. Here's something called an air lane. Different models, mostly warbirds, mostly World War II aircraft. Continuing along, if you're into control line, you're going to see a lot of brands you do indeed identify with. For example, Berkeley was in business for about 35 years, and they had a huge, huge assortment of aircraft. And you can tell their characteristic box was red, or rather white with red trim, and always had photographs of the aircraft on the box. Whenever you see this, Berkeley Models. It was a very successful company until the bottom literally fell out. They just couldn't sell anymore because their quality had dropped off. But you can see how many he has. He has, as far as I know, every single model they ever made. You can see these are all Berkeley, the Air Coupe, the Aranca. All this wall is Berkeley kits. And it's pretty much complete. They had something like, I think they had about just over 100 different kits that they made. Some are still in storage. But you can see these were the very, very early ones. These were pre-war. But most of them came out after the war in the late 40s. That's when the company was really thriving. And they tried to make a model for everybody. They had radio control, they had combat, scale, stunt, things of that nature. One of these, let's see. I learned how to fly. When I was a kid in 1952, this is a plane I learned how to fly on, the Wee Duper Zilch, with a little McCoy 098 engine in it.
Point at it again.
I beg your pardon?
Point at that kit again.
Okay, this kit here is the Wee Duper Zilch. It was made in 1950. The kit came out in 1950. And for Christmas, I got a little McCoy 098 control line engine. I built it not having a clue what I was doing. It looked like it had been crashed, even though it had never even flown. But I finally did learn to fly on it. And that was in South Jersey, where I grew up. And as you can see, there's more and more. A lot of these I've never even heard of, but they're all Berkeley kits. And you can see they go to the ceiling. The Quest was a team racer that was very, very successful. They even made one profile kit with an aluminum profile body, but it didn't sell well because of the cost, and it did not perform. It was too heavy. And this is about the end of the Berkeley kits. As you can see, they even had little models with a CO2 cartridge to propel them. These are odd kits, mostly made in China. We have no idea what their history is, what they stand for, even how they got here. A lot of these were brought in by servicemen. Then we can move along here. Here is mostly memorabilia from one benefactor of the museum. It's too in-depth to go into. There's so much stuff. It's mostly his own personal hobby. He had memorabilia from World War II. He had all sorts of plastic airplanes, as you can see here.
That looks like Les McDonald's team shirt there.
It may be. It may be. He collected everything. He had an entire house that was nothing but his hoard of model airplane equipment. Even if you look up, if you can get upward, you look up, these are some of the planes that he donated, many of which had never even been flown. He just built them, hung them on the wall. And he had, as far as we could tell, about 200 airplanes. Some were in very bad condition that we couldn't even display. Actually, this particular wall are all the kits that Brodak now manufactures. They're all for sale at the hobby shop. These are actually kits that you assemble. They're not ready to fly. They're not ready to cover. Every single kit has been totally developed, pre-built by John with a complete instruction. And any of these can be purchased, and they're all very, very nicely made. They're competitive in certain areas. We can start over that wall, look all the way over here with Brodak products. These are all kits that are made right in the factory here in Carmichael's. None of this is farmed out. They make everything, even the propellers, the hardware, everything needed to get these aircraft into the air. This was a company he purchased. It was originally called Dare Models. And all of these are now made, but instead of cutting them by hand, we have a laser machine that will cut out all the parts from AutoCAD drawings. And they go over to the very end of this wall here. These are all Dare kits, very nicely made, mostly scale, and a lot of very small kits. Just briefly, this wall contains just a sample of some of our ready to fly or almost ready to fly, and also ready to cover. ARF means almost ready to fly, and you'll see some says ARC, which means almost ready to cover. These are virtually all modern planes from probably the 50s on up, nothing pre-war here. And virtually all of these models are they're very good competition models. They're literally shipped all over the world, and they've been very successful in competition, even on a national level. And
Hold it.
Particular wall here has there was a company called Consolidated, which had a huge array. These are all the ones we could find. They had a huge array of models. Most of them were stunt and combat. They went out of business in the early 60s. Once again, they just couldn't make ends meet. But he has a very rare collection. A lot of these were literally found in a private collection, purchased, and put on display. These will never be built. They're strictly for the life of the museum, if you will. And many years ago, John acquired a collection from a gentleman in New England, and besides collecting model airplanes, as we discussed before, he also collected any and all World War II memorabilia, military memorabilia. You can see it starts about here with all sorts of different helmets that were used in the war, uniforms, jet helmets, jet aircraft helmets, more uniforms, ammunition boxes, oxygen kits, even decks of cards. This guy collected everything. And you can see here, these were radios that were used in the military. We have a radio, I believe it might be this one. It was actually in a B-17. We have other replicas, even some replicas of dummy bombs, rockets, things of that nature. But this is all military here. Military instruments and cameras. But this is just this particular wing, if you will, is just all military. But you can also see model aircraft. If we pan upward, we'll start there with a lag that John Brodak built for scale competition. And the rest of these, as we go along, are just models that were donated by different people. Profile, full body, and these are all from the 50s and 60s. And virtually every one of us complete, could be ready to fly with minimum amount of work. Here we have just an odd assortment of models that once again we acquired. We don't know much about them. They're odd names. There's a plane here called the Vengeance. Never heard of that. A Skybox. A Stinger, which actually John liked it so much he decided to produce a kit, which is available. It's on the wall that we talked about before. And these are kits that some of them, the company made one kit and went out of business. A Baby Bombshell, a Quickie Rat, a Sneaker. The Sneaker was actually a very successful combat ship in the early 60s. And the rest of these are just oddball. Falcon Models. There's a company called Falcon Models. Nobody's ever heard of it. We have fly line models that made some very beautiful scale planes, very, very difficult to assemble and to finish. And this is just kind of an orphanage, if you will, of odd aircraft. There's a company in Cleveland, Ohio, that also got very involved with model aviation. Most of it was free flight and scale. And the original Cleveland kits, they cost a nickel, and they were printed. The parts were printed on balsa, and you had to take a razor blade and cut out each part one at a time. They were usually glued together with something called banana oil, which was just a sticky substance that became now what we call like Elmer's glue, that kind of thing. But all of these are made by Cleveland. These were made before the war, these small boxes. This was made just after the war, I believe. And then the rest, different times. They lasted not quite into the 60s. And they, like so many other model aircraft companies, they just literally went out of business. There are more Cleveland kits. Most of this wall is Cleveland. As you can see, they made a huge variety of kits. Sadly, they're gone. But the name will live on, but that's all. We have a small little reference library right here with just general, anything to do with a hobby of model aircraft, model cars, and a little sitting room for people who just want to come in and leaf through different books, magazines. And you can see as we pan upward, there's a company called Carl Goldberg. He had some very, very successful model aircraft. The Double Voodoo was one of the most successful combat planes ever made. He made a free flight. He had the Buster, which was a very good profile stunt plane. And as you can see, odds and ends that are all Carl Goldberg. A little combat, another stunt plane called, what was it called, the Cosmic Wind. And once again, the company is gone. And this is another group of models that in their time were very successful. Jetco made a lot of gliders, both hand launch, tow line gliders, and even made some rubber band powered planes. As you can see here, they were all stick built, covered with light tissue. They got, in the 60s, they got into the larger. The Shark was a very successful stunt plane. It was the first big airplane. back in the 50s, most airplanes were powered by 35s, and this came out, I believe, in the early 60s, 61, and it was a winner in many contests, and it was the first big plane that it was powered by a K&B 45 instead of the usual Fox 35. And these are, again, a bunch of odd planes that, you know, one of a kind, flash in a pan type kits. Here's a few more Jetco. They made a successful Sabre Stunt and a Dolphin. These are still, a lot of these are still flying today. This is our library, the Jack Sheik's Model Aviation Library. Jack Sheik's was a fellow from Indianapolis, retired policeman, and became one of the most successful designer, builder, flyers, mostly in the 60s. We have approximately 10,000 different magazines, just about every magazine ever made dedicated to model aviation. A lot of these are even pre-war, you know, before the glow engines and everything, of course. And what we did is we spent over a year cataloging them, putting them into binders, and they're all here for anybody who wants to look at them. You know, obviously the museum is open to the public, and for the people who want to do nostalgia, everything's marked by the name of the publication and the year and the month it was printed. So if somebody wants to find something that was on his birthday in 1945 or something, he can just start looking at the dates on the binder covers. And we have a huge assortment, as you can see, of hardcover books, mostly model aviation, but there's other odds and ends. There's some aerospace, full-scale aviation, military. It's a very complete model aviation museum. The aircraft hanging on the ceiling there is called a Fireball. It was designed by Jim Walker, and it was one of the first real stunt planes that you could demonstrate loops and inverted flights and figure eights. He flew these back in the early 50s. Mostly, he never competed with them, but they were just mostly for demonstration. This is an assortment of aircraft that were donated. Most of these were racing planes, team racing, and some was called rat racing. Usually anywhere from 2 to 6 people in a circle, flying very, very fast. They making pit stops. It became too dangerous, so in the, I believe it was the early 60s or the mid 60s, they just stopped doing it. They've got a milder version of team race now, but it's not like the old days. And we have here some interesting memorabilia. This particular plane was flown by the late Jerry Phelps, and he won quite a few national competitions with it. He was also on the world aerobatic model aerobatic team. Sadly, he passed away a few years ago. And as you can see, these planes here were just donated by different individuals. We have it on record, but they're not yet tagged as far as who donated them.
And what
This
about
plane, this aircraft here, was called the Gypsy. It was flown to many national championships by a gentleman by the name of Jim Silhavy. I believe he's still with us. He attended 1 or 2 of our annual fly-ins, and that was one of the aircraft that he flew in competition. He donated it to the museum. This was donated, I believe, by an anonymous donor who didn't identify. It was just brought to the museum. This is what I was told. I don't know anything about it. Some of the others here, this was called a Tucker Special. Very, very successful model. That scratch built, I have no idea what it is. Here we have a, I think that was called a Zilch. Designed by Jim Safdie in the early 50s. This aircraft was made by designed and built by the late Marvin Denny from Wichita, Kansas. A very, very competent modeler. He designed a number of very successful combat planes, and he was an excellent stunt flyer too. Sadly, we lost him a few years back. But he's a true gentleman and a great modeler. And it continues here. You see models that a lot of these we don't even know where they came from. People would come and just leave models at the museum. Here's a model, donated. And as I mentioned before, we did acquire some radio control equipment from the actually pre-war up until maybe the early 60s. These are not modern, they're not even legal to use anymore. The frequencies have all been changed. So the FCC would not certify any of these. We have receivers, servos, transmitters. Back in the early 60s, there was about 15 or 20 US manufacturers of model aviation radio control equipment. Now, as far as I know, there's none. I don't know that much about radio control, but most of the companies, as far as I know, have gone out of business. Before, it wasn't just model aviation. We have a lot of memorabilia of full-scale aircraft. This is a 1954 Franklin aircraft engine, which was used in Stinson Voyager. The company went out of business. It was the same company that made the Franklin automobiles, as a matter of fact, which also had air-cooled engines. This was found in a scrap heap, and I was fortunate to acquire it before it was melted down, totally restored cosmetically, and it's here on a display stand, and you can see I wrote a little treatise on it, just describing as much as I knew about the motor. The problem with them, they were good engines, but they were extremely heavy and inefficient. This is a replica of a hobby shop that you'd find anywhere in the 50s up to the mid 60s. They were almost all privately owned. You could go in, hang out with, talk to the owner. He would open kit boxes, let you look at the engines, everything. Sometimes we didn't even buy anything, but we just spent half a day there talking about model airplanes. I spent many, many hours in shops just like this when I lived in South Jersey, when I lived in Buffalo, and when I lived in Syracuse. And you could look and find anything you wanted to build, finish, and fly a model airplane. We had engines, as you can see in the display case. We had all the things you need, the hardware, the bell crank, the lines, the different kits, glue, model aircraft dope. Anything you needed to build a model airplane, you could get at your local hobby shop. Sadly, as far as I know, there's only one local hobby shop left in the United States. That's here in Pennsylvania in Carmichael's, the Brodak Hobby Shop. And they had everything. They had magazines. They had these little balsa airplanes that you could just glue together or just slip together just to go out and fly them. They're powered with rubber bands. I have to make a correction. I was just informed that there is indeed one kind of real old-time hobby shop left in Dayton, Ohio, called the Radical RC Hobby Shop. What they have, I do not know. I have a feeling that, the way RC has taken over, you'll see very little control line in any hobby shop. But we have to go visit and find out, don't we?
Right.
This is what we hope will become one of the largest and most comprehensive model aircraft engine collections in the entire United States. There's just about every brand ever made, a lot of pre-war but mostly post-war equipment, engines that a lot of people have never heard of. There are some engines that the company made half a dozen of them, went out of business. And we start with the first three cabinets, our engines all made in the United States. Some very, very valuable, some still in production, believe it or not, by private individuals who bought the tooling. And we have mostly, as you can see, American engines, and we then go to the imported engines. Here we have engines from Japan, England, Germany, Norway, Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, Isle of Man. It's amazing how many, Italy we have, it's amazing how many countries got into the model aviation business. We have some from Moldavia, Poland, France, Spain, Brazil. All these engines are in working order, and many came from a private collection. Many were donated by private individuals. And a lot of work went into building this. We have actually a lot more. We've got about another 200 engines that are going to go in some of the blank spaces. but they're all dedicated to model aviation, and not just control line. They're both RC and control line. And it was a very interesting, way of displaying them. We decided to make it by country rather than just by size or model or anything of that nature. And anybody who visits a museum, we even have what we call an orphanage here. We have about 30 engines that nobody knows what they are. And what we're doing is, anybody who visits a museum sees a sign, they may say, hey, I had one of those when I was a kid, it's a such and such. And I have my number and internet contact, so anybody who identifies an engine will put the engine in the proper place, and it'll put a little tag on it, identified by Joe Jones or something of that nature. And so this is, as I say, we call it the orphanage. Everything else has been identified over a period. It probably took us to identify all these a few years. The entire museum was about a 6-year project, with the construction, with the building permits. We had to jump through quite a few hoops to get everything going, but we hope that this is going to be the most comprehensive museum in the United States, mostly, of course, dedicated to control line. And we have, as I say, a lot of other odds and ends, military memorabilia, uniforms, anything to do with, if it flies, we may have a sample of it here. This cabinet was donated by a few private individuals. These were from their own accumulations with the hobby. Like, for example, a widow may donate her late husband's equipment to it. All of these engines were used in various forms of model aviation. Some of these, this for example, is actually handmade. It was never produced. A very ambitious machinist decided to build a model engine. We don't know if it ever flew or if it even ever ran, but these are all, some of these were actually sold in hardware stores and toy stores. Before I mentioned the Fire Baby, that was the first ready-to-fly model airplane from Jim Walker. And we have a similar setup here. Somebody donated all these engines, and some of them are actually on loan. We keep a record of everything that's on loan and donated. So if somebody loans us an engine, they decide for some reason they want it back, all they do is contact us and we ship it back to them. This is a collection, interesting collection that was also donated. These people collected patches that were usually sewn on jackets and shirts. Some of them advertised, they were military. Like for example, there's one that says Rev Up Props. That was a propeller manufacturer for model aircraft. And AMA, somebody attended the AMA Nationals 50th anniversary. All of these are patches that were sewn on different items of clothing. And we also he also collected pins and badges, which you can see, which were, some are military, some are civilian, and just the kind of thing you'd pin on your shirt collar. And a couple of aircraft that were sold. These are plastic, ready to fly. We used to call them ready to crash because that's what they usually did when they first tried to fly them. They're very unsuccessful, but they made a lot of kids get interested in the hobby. And more of the same. We have propeller molds, we have engine test stands, skis, because we used to fly in the snow, believe it or not, so we made our own skis for our airplanes. And up here we just have different molds for canopies and cowlings for engines, things of that nature. This room is dedicated, it's a media room dedicated to George Aldrich, who really was, many people refer to him as the father of model aerobatics. At the age of 18 years old, he designed what became the most successful stunt plane ever, called the Nobler. And probably 90% of the planes flying today were either patterned after or influenced by the Nobler. As you can see in the photograph, that's the Nobler he's holding. And these are different awards that were given to him over the years. But he was a very prolific designer, very nice fellow, very easy to talk to, and a real genius when it came to model aviation. And this entire room is dedicated to him. We have a TV. We're going to have CDs that will be available for people to watch and listen to, or just relax and learn a little bit about Mr. Aldrich. He actually visited us in 1997. He visited us here at the annual Brodak fly-in, and believe it or not, we resurrected his old Nobler, and it wasn't airworthy, but it was good enough so that he could actually pick it up and fly it, or pick it up and just handle it and get some good memories from it. In fact, when he came to the meet, he said, "Is this heaven? No, this is Brodak's." And Brodak's has become really we'll call it the epicenter of control line model aviation. Anybody in the control line aviation either has been to Brodak's or will be there, or has tried to come. And here we have our video center, and we'll have, as I said, we're going to have CDs, so people can pick something out of a CD library and spend some time just visiting. We have more memorabilia from full-scale aviation. A gentleman by the name of Sherman, R.J. Sherman. He was a major in the U.S. Marine Corps. He was a pilot and a collector. He collected everything to do, as I said before, anything to do with aircraft, military, whatever he collected. He collected different stewardess uniform, different military uniforms, even something more modern, jet aircraft, complete with the device to keep you from blocking out in high G maneuvers. This was before they inflated. This is the one the pilot had to tighten them up to keep the blood from rushing down. Now they inflate automatically. And this, I believe, I'm not too sure, this I believe was toward the end of World War II, because it is Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps really became active, I think, in the early 50s. And as you can see, there's more equipment that he donated, airline tickets, all sorts of information about the different airlines. He did a little bit of radio control, as you can see by the transmitter here. And he had a lot of different awards for military service. He was quite the guy. And I believe he's still with us, but I don't think he'll ever be able to travel to the museum. And here we just have an assortment of photographs, and some of them in John's younger days. Up to about 5 years before his passing, he was actually a DJ also as a hobby. Mostly he did it as a charitable thing for different organizations, Kiwanis, American Legion. He was known as Johnny Lee, and he had all the equipment. We lug it to the different areas where he was setting up. And we have some different pictures of him that were featured in newspaper. There's a picture of he and his wife, Coral Lee, sitting in the cockpit of the Spruce Goose after it was moved to Oregon. And these are just pictures of different people he flew with, different awards. He was also, he did some minor league baseball, as you can see in the one photograph there. And there's a picture, I believe, with him and Mickey Mantle, and I don't know the other. Oh yeah, there's a photograph of him with the famous Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford. John's in the middle. And this is just kind of an assortment of oddball memorabilia that we found around, or John had as a kid. He started a hobby shop when he was in his 20s in a garage, and that's how he got really into the hobby. He started around 1950, and we even have a photograph of him in his hobby shop down there on the right-hand end of the display shelf. We started building the Stearman here, and for some reason we had the engine, everything was set up, and for some reason he just lost interest in it, so here it is. That's as far as we got in the building. Someday I may finish it for him and maybe even take it out and fly it. This was the official uniform of the supermarket employees. We have the supermarket shop and save right here in Brodak's in Carmichael's.